yeah, increasingly throughout the 70s and 80s, he's coming to see politics really as the arena where he's going to make his next stand.
And of course, his most famous early opponent is none other than Julian Bond. And that's another riveting story. I mean, here you have these two old buddies that have been not just friends, but really close friends in this movement together. And suddenly they are vying for the same position. And it gets ugly.
It gets very ugly. It's a kind of tragic story. You know, when Lewis first comes to Atlanta in 1963 as chairman of SNCC, that's when he really gets to be friends with Bond. And Bond comes from, you know, really an upper middle class background. His father was an esteemed black educator and college president. He met Albert Einstein and Paul Robeson and all kinds of people in his youth. And he seems to be someone for whom everything comes easily, although, of course, he still faced racism and racial discrimination and you know, all of that very much. So, but it's Bond who like teaches him how to order in a fancy restaurant, you know, what a mixed drink is and all kinds of things. And
he was lighter skinned too, which also creates this interesting dynamic.
Right. There's a real issue of colorism and, you know, a kind of a greater esteem sometimes for the lighter skinned African Americans. And, you know, they become good friends. When they marry, you know, their wives become friends. They take vacations together. You know, they were called the civil rights twins in the 70s.
So how on earth did they get into a position where they're running against each other? Like who was responsible for that? Which one of them was?
Well, yeah, it's disputed. You know, Lewis had run in 77, had come in a kind of creditable second place to a man named Weishfowler, a white city council president, who then in 86 decides to run for Senate. Bond claimed that Lewis had agreed, you run, you know, I'll run once, you run the next time. Lewis had no memory of such an agreement. So it's a little unclear whether Lewis was reneging on an agreement or whether Bond was perhaps holding out some passing conversation as some, you know, formal agreement they had. But either way, in 1986, neither one is willing to back down. I mean, it's partly Lillian, I think, again, gives Lewis the strength to say, you don't need to step aside for Julian. You know, you deserve this as much as he. You have every bit, you know, as much right to run as he does. At first, everybody's lining up behind Julian Bond. I mean, we think of Lewis today as such an icon, but in 1986, you know, Bond was the one who had hosted SNL and who was in movies with Sidney Poitier and who, you know, he was really the big celebrity. And
tall, handsome,
very handsome, silver-tongued, incredibly witty and sardonic. I mean, he could, you know, you read through his papers and it's just full of kind of cutting, hilarious comments. A real, you know, the kind of person who you can understand Black Atlantans wanting to say this should be our face in the United States Congress. And all the elites lined up for him. You know, he had fundraisers from the Temptations and Quincy Jones performing. And, you know, like it was just all the power behind him. Lewis, you know, had a couple of things going for him. One, he was kind of slowly, people were kind of see, okay, Julian's this big celebrity and everything, but Lewis had an authenticity about him. In a sense, he was going to work hard for the voter. He also was working hard. He would go out there in the morning and be at the factory gates at dawn. He would be in the aisles of the convenience stores at midnight, shaking whose ever hand he could find. So he just worked it in retail politics. And in a local election, that counts for a lot. But then the other big thing was Julian Bond had a pretty serious cocaine addiction, which was known to Lewis and was known to other people in the elite circles and, you know, was not widely talked about, but was acknowledged. when it's still a multi-candidate race, before they get to the two-man runoff, it's one of these gadfly candidates who raises the issue, who says all of us here on this stage at a 5 or 6 person debate should take a drug test. And this is the summer of Just Say No. Reagan is having his entire cabinet take and reveal the outcomes of their drug tests. Len Bias, the basketball star, dies of a cocaine overdose.
Oh man, I remember that. Yeah.
So it's some people see this as going negative, and of course it can be seen that way. But others say, look, drugs were listed by voters as the number one issue they cared about, and Atlantans had a right to know if their prospective congressman was using drugs in a serious way.
Thank God Marion Barry wasn't in the race.
Right. But anyway, it gets to a runoff of Lewis and Bond. And Bond, in the first round of the election, gets something like 47% to Lewis's 34%. So it's still looking like he's going to win. But in the debates between the two men, Lewis finally, after much reluctance...
It took him how many debates to finally cough this up? Like 3?
Well, it was the second debate where he raises it. But, his campaign manager said, we were like Angelo Dundee and Customato in the corners, the boxing managers saying, work it in, raise it, during the commercial breaks. And Lewis kind of lets the opportunity pass in the first debate. But in the second debate, Bond comes at him with some kind of bullshit ethics claim, saying you took a donation from this person who happened to be a lobbyist, but was also just a longtime friend and supporter of Lewis's. And Lewis gets indignant because Lewis, one thing you cannot say about him is he was unethical. He wasn't on the take. So he gets his dander up. And so he finally comes out by saying, Julian, I think we should both go to Grady Hospital and take a drug test.
Right now, right? He says,
either right now or the next morning. Yeah, something like that.
Let's go. Let's fucking go, man. You want to go outside? You want to go outside?
Right, exactly. And then Julian compounds the problem by saying, there's no drug problem in Atlanta, which, not only the audience, but the cameraman starts laughing.
Yes, that was you almost see the camera go up and down as the dude is cracking up.
It's sort of like Ford saying, no Soviet domination of Poland, or